All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to New Energy, our series, New Energy Conversations with Early Career Energy Researchers. Thank you all for being here today. So my name is Megan. I'm the Manager of Academic Initiatives at the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth College, and I'm very excited to welcome everyone here today for the second talk of our winter season of the series. So if you haven't joined us for this series before, I'll give just a quick background on our New Energy Initiative. So the goal of our New Energy program is to connect, empower, and raise the profile of early stage researchers in energy and climate. And one way that we do this is through the New Energy series webinar, which started during the pandemic, and it's continued on. We've hosted over 50 speakers so far, and it provides emerging scholars with the opportunity to share their work with broader audiences. And we also host an annual in-person New Energy Summer Summit that aims to increase the capacity of early stage energy and climate researchers to accelerate transitions to equitable and sustainable energy systems and a healthy climate via interdisciplinary scholarship and collaboration. And our speaker today is an alumni of our second New Energy Summit. And our applications are actually open now for our third Summer Summit. So please reach out to us or check out the Irving Institute website if you are an advanced PhD student, postdoc, or assistant professor and you're interested in applying to the summit. So just a quick note before we begin, after the talk today, we'll have an opportunity for discussion. So please feel free to enter your questions for the speaker using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can do that at any time during the program. And our discussion today will be moderated by Dr. Amanda Graham, who is joining us as well, who is the academic director for the Irving Institute. So thank you for being here, Amanda. Welcome. And so now I will introduce our speaker today. We are very excited to have Qingran Li here. So as I said, Qingran was an alumni of our second New Energy Summit. So we're very excited to have her here today and see her again. So Qingran is an assistant professor at Clarkson University in the David D. Ray School of Business and Institute for a Sustainable Environment. She got her doctoral degree in environmental policy at Duke University in 2021 and her master's degree in management science and engineering from Stanford University in 2015. Qingran's research expertise is in environmental economics with a focus on marine resources management, climate change adaptation, and clean energy transition policies. So I will now turn it over to Qingran to give her talk. Thank you so much. Welcome, Qingran.
Well, thank you, Megan, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. See if it works. Right. Hopefully the screen sharing is working. In case it doesn't work, let me know by signal. Like just give me a holler on your.
It looks great.
All right. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about one of my ongoing projects about the spillover benefits from electric vehicle charging stations to local business. Right. So what is the motivation to talking about electric vehicles, right? Or more specifically, talking about EV charging stations? I'm pretty sure that some of the audience today actually has experienced either EV drivers or using EV charging stations, or if you don't, you probably have seen an EV charging station somewhere surrounding where you work or where you live, right? So why do we care about EV chargings? Because it's sort of like the critical hurdle to EV adoptions, right? We want more people to adopt EV, but researchers and some studies have found out that there are, if you look over the countries or look over some regional studies, there are charging deserts where people cannot easily access EV charging stations or public EV charging stations, so that if they also have limited access from charging at home, then they won't be very hesitant to adopt EVs, right? Even if EV may be at a comparable price to the other alternative vehicles. So what our study also find is, if you look at some of the the blog posts here, we are not only having a lack of EV charging stations, we have some sort of imbalanced distributions of EV charging stations. So it turns out low-income areas and many of the disadvantaged communities would have even less EV charging station access. right? So what is the problem here? As an environmental economist, we always care about identifying either there are some externalities or there are some imbalance in cost and benefits that are preventing people from making the most efficient decisions, right? So what economists are viewing the charging station network as a challenge in terms of a market failure. So why do we call it the market failure? It's because there are something called the network externalities that are related with the locations and the numbers of charging stations. So the story works like this. If you have more EV charging stations, that sort of stimulates more people to adopt EVs, right? Because they have a lower cost of using electric vehicles. And if more people are using electric vehicles, it turns out they are more likely to access EV charging stations, and that turns into more profit for these EV charging station installers, and that motivate them to install more EV charging stations. So this is sort of like a feeding back loop, right? So some people would call it the chicken and egg problem. So you have these circles that keeps going on to stimulate more EV charging stations and more EV adoptions. So why do we care about this? Because if you have these sort of network externalities, right? So what we are going to see is either there are some costs from EV charging stations that could spill over to those who are using the EV charging stations, but didn't really actually pay the full cost of building or maintaining these charging stations. Or maybe those who are building and maintaining the charging stations actually didn't realize the full cost of those charging stations to them, right? So either you have some benefits that fails to be received, or you have some lack of information to these full benefits. And all of that combined are leading to some sort of underinvestment problem of EV charging station. So that's why we call it the market failure, and we need some interventions to make it work, right? So what are these benefits? Imagine if you have one more charging station added, what it's going to do is you're probably going to have some climate and health benefits from stimulating more users of electric vehicles, and they replace the conventional vehicles, right? And that's leading to lower emissions and maybe better air qualities, so either globally and locally. And it would also have some longer term benefits. So this is relating to the circling stories, right? So as more people are using EVs, they stimulate more EV charging stations and then more EV adoptions. And you have these all long-term benefits from your initial development of EV charging stations, right? So there are actually something else. So there are some recent studies also showing we have an increased local property value due to establishment of new charging stations nearby. This study is published in Nature Sustainability in last year, so it's pretty new. And we realized that actually, in addition to the local benefits in terms of higher property values, there could be some other local benefits, because if you people are actually using these properties, right, there are infrastructures, and most of them are public infrastructures. So you would imagine they have some spillover benefits to the businesses nearby, and that is the focus of our study, which is we want to explore whether EV charging station could induce a higher sales to local business, and we're going to explain how it works. Right. So that's for the underinvestment problem due to lack of realizations of benefits. As I said, that we also have the charging desert located more likely to be located in disadvantaged communities, right? And that has also been found in most of the literatures, saying that we not only have an underinvestment of EV charging stations, we also have an inequitable investment of EV charging stations. Right? So meaning that those communities that are either low income or maybe more people of color are located in it are having less access to EV charging stations. And in our study, we realized that those businesses located in these locations are probably going to have also a lower access to EV charging stations. Okay, so what do we find, right? Just to give you a brief summary of the results. what we find is on average, we find monthly sales of businesses overall to increase about 13%. After you have an EV charging station, and here in this talk, I'm going to show you the results for the public EV charging station located nearby. And we also find that this 13% increase is very likely to be driven by two types of business. In retail trade, which is increase about 7%, and in accommodation and food services, an increase of over 20%, right? So then I'm going to explain why we see the increase in sales. What we find is it is an increase in sale that is because more people start to visit the store, and also each of the person on average, or each of the customer on average, are spending more amount in the store, right? And we're going to see that in the results as well. So lastly, I'm going to show you or highlight the result we have for disadvantaged communities. So comparing the effects of EV charging stations on businesses that are located in these disadvantaged communities versus those that are not, right? And we're going to see that the effect of EV charging stations in terms of increasing business sales are so much larger for those who are in either low income, or maybe they have less white populations, or a higher portion of the populations being African Americans, right? So now let's start to put some numbers on the paper, right? So what we want to find, or we want to identify, is the relationship between whether the business is in proximity to an EV charging station versus whether the EV charging station is affecting its sales, right? So if you simply plot the natural log of the in-store spend for each of the business, and here is monthly spending numbers, versus the distance of this business to the nearest charging station, right? You're going to find a negative correlation between these two values. Can we just simply base on this observation to say that if you decrease the distance to EV charging stations, so moving EV charging stations closer to your business will actually boost up your sales? It is not that simple. So why it is not that simple is this negative correlation cannot be simply interpreted as a causal relationship, right? And that is because you could probably have an opposite trends for how EV charging station distance changes over time, which tends to decrease, right? As you add more and more stations. And you're also going to have probably an increasing trend for how many dollars people are spending every month, right? So this different trends over time are probably one of the reasons that leading to a negative correlation, but didn't say anything about the causal relationship. And most importantly, the EV charging stations where they are located are not randomly chosen, right? Or are not randomly selected. There are a lot of studies already show that if you have more people living in there, right? If you have more urbanized areas, or if you have more populations that are wealthier, you're more likely to see a lot of EV charging stations, meaning that the average distance from any locations to an EV charging station is going to be shorter, right? And those locations or those regions are also more likely to be where people spend the most of the money, right? So that's why you're probably going to see this negative correlation, but that's not because EV charging station is boosting your sales. So due to all these kind of biases in practice in our data set, we do have to have a more advanced methodologies to split out to identify what is the causal relationship. So what is the methodology we're using? We're using a method called the difference in differences, so DID model, to identify the causal effect of placing an EV charging station nearby to the local sales of business, right? So I'm not going to bore you with a lot of equations and models because I think this is a more diverse audience. So this is my only slide to explain what's how the methodology works, right? So imagine you have two groups of places. Here we're talking about stores. some of the stores are closer to EV charging stations. Some of the stores are very far away. And the distance to an EV charging station changes over time. So if we set a buffer to define how near a store is to a local charging station, right? And we have the open dates of that charging station, we're going to define an after treatment period or a post-treatment period, depending on when the store has an EV charging station that was built after that date and is within the proximity buffer that we define. And we are going to have all the other stores that are outside of the buffer. So they are too far away from the charging station so that they are not treated. So if we have a treatment group and a control group, we are going to observe their changes of outcomes. So here, the sales to change over time. And suppose they follow approximately the same trend by controlling all the other factors. What is the difference between the two parallel trend between the two groups are going to be reduced from the total differences. So that's why we see the true treatment effect from EV charging stations to the sales of the business are only a difference that is one portion of the total difference, right? And that is the effect that we're going to identify for today. All right. Okay. So in our context, the treatment actually is a little bit more complicated than the setup I just showed you, right? So in the previous setup, I say there is a single treatment and then we have a before and after. In this case, we actually have the treatment for different stores to be staggered, meaning that the treatment could occur at different times for different stores, right? So what we have done is, for example, if we have a charging station in this neighborhood, right, shown by this red point here, we are going to define a buffer according to some proximity measure, right? So here, say we have a buffer of 100 meters distance as what do we call it as nearby to a charging station, right? So this location pointed here, which is a seafood restaurant, would be within that buffer. However, if you look further into like a point here, which is an Italian restaurant, and the distance between that Italian restaurant and the charging station would be outside of the proximity buffer we defined, right? So these two locations, one would be treated because it's nearby, and the other one is not treated. And the before and after would depend on the open dates of the charging station, right? So where do we get these informations? We get these informations according to the EV charging station location data that are managed and posted by Department of Energy's Alternative Fuel Data Center, which provide us the address. So we know where are these charging stations and also provide us the open dates, right? And not only that, we can also see which are public charging stations, which are level 2s and DC fast. So in this study or in the results I'm showing you today, all of the results are speaking about public charging stations that are level 2 and above. So level 2 and DC fast. And we combine this data set, so the electric vehicle charging station data set, with a store spending data coming from a data company that's called SafeGraph, which provide us anonymous card transaction data, but it's already been aggregated to individual places. So what we have is the monthly sales for each of the store, and we also have the addresses of the store, right? So that we can match these addresses with the addresses, the locations of the charging stations to calculate the distances over time, right? So what other variables we're having is the number of transactions and customers. Which business sectors are these stores located, right? Is it a retail store? Is it more like a restaurant or hotels? So using these two data sets, and we constructed a time series or more likely a panel data for each of the stores and looking monthly for how their distances to a nearest charging stations change over time, right? And our data set has covered the period from the starting month of 2019 to the ending month of 2022. So 4 years of data, monthly data is what we have in this data set. And suppose we use a 100-meter buffer, which approximately is over 300 feet, to calculate which are the stores are near and which are the stores are far away from charging stations. And in our sample, we are going to get about 233 stores that are being treated, right? And if you look at the business sectors of these stores, you are going to find most of the treated stores where they are near charging stations are either in retail trade, so grocery stores, general merchandise, gasoline stations, etc. And they are also in this accommodation and food services category, right? So either restaurants or drinking places like bars or traveler accommodation. That's what the data set called it, but most likely these are hotels, right? Okay, so what do we find? We use the difference in differences methodology to identify what is the average treatment effect of having a charging station nearby to the local business's monthly sales, right? So our major results are like this. If you focus on all the places, so didn't discriminate what business sectors this places belongs to, we see approximately a 13.2% increase comparing to the sales of the store before it has a charging station, but also we separated the effect also from the control group, right? And we also find that this total effect or this overall average effect are driven by two sectors. So first of all, we see the retail trade sector is having about 7% increase, and it's significant. So here, the arrow bars are the 95% confidence intervals. And also we see a much larger increase in the accommodation and food, so restaurant and hotels. Why do I say it's driven by these two sectors? Because if I exclude these two sectors out of the sample and only run the model with all the other places, I didn't find any significant effect, right? So that's why I think we can more confident to say this 13.2% increase is very likely to driven by these two sectors, so either retail trade or accommodation and food. So now let's move to explaining why EV charging stations could drive up the sales, right? So this diagram is showing you what are the potential channels. So imagine if you have a new EV charging station established nearby, why there are more monthly sales or monthly revenues in the stores. It's either because you have more visitors, right? And some of them might have, or most of them might have an electric vehicle. Or if you don't have more visitors, you could also have the visitors that are spending more dollars, right? So previously you have a group of people with maybe 10% of them are EV owners, but after the EV charging station, you would have a higher amount of your customers are actually those who are owning EVs, right? So maybe they are the people with higher income, so that's why they're spending more. Or maybe they are just staying longer in order to charge their cars, right? So we have the results for each of the channels here, just except the spending longer ones, because we're still cleaning or still preparing the foot traffic data. But I think the result is coming up, right? So here for today, I'm going to show you 3 of the 4 channels. Okay. So first of all, did we see an increase in the number of customers after the installation of EV charging station? The short answer is yes, right? However, it actually is a little bit different for different types of business. For retail trade, we see an insignificant increase, right? So it's like a 4% increase, but insignificant if you look at the 95% confidence interval. However, for accommodations and food, so restaurants, hotels, and drinking places, we see almost 16% or 15.8% increase in the number of customers after an EV charging station is located nearby, right? So which explains that very likely after you get a new EV charging station nearby, for restaurants and hotels, you are going to have more customers visiting your stores. Right? The second channel we're looking at is whether EV charging stations would stimulate more spending per customer, right? So if we're looking at the spending dollars per customer, which is a variable that are given from the spending data set, still splitting out the two samples here, you are going to see the more significant effect is showing in the retail trade business, but not so much in the accommodation and food businesses, right? Which I think makes a lot of sense because if you're going to a restaurant or hotels, right? So the rates are relatively fixed. Spending one night in a hotel when the hotel has a charging station versus the hotel doesn't have a charging station probably doesn't going to change your spendings per visit that much, right? So that's why we see maybe that's one of the potential explanations that we see an insignificant increase in the dollars spent per customer to hotels and restaurants after EV charging stations is established. However, we do see a significant increase to retail trade. So grocery stores, general merchandise stores, after EV charging stations are installed nearby, we see like a 4% increase in the dollars spent per customer, right? So what are the driven factors of the spending per customer? We have two explanations here, right? One potential explanation is when we have a higher income customer, those are the ones who are more likely to adopt EVs. So what do we see? If we split out by the stores, by the type of the business, and we look just at the effect on average customer income. How do we get average customer income? We get the average customer income from the spending data set, even though we didn't have every transactions by each customers because it's anonymous, right? We can get the distributions of customer income. So we have number of customers in different income buckets, right? Who are visiting the stores and spending at the stores. So according to that distribution, we calculate an average customer income for each month and for each of the store. So we're using that variable to see whether EV charging station has any effect on the income of the customer, right? So on basically on the type of the customer who are visiting the store, rich or poor. What we see here is you're going to see a significant effect only in the accommodation and food services. So meaning that if you have an EV charging station near hotels or restaurants, you are going to attract more higher income customers to your stores. Either they are going to eat at your restaurant or drinking at the bar or staying some nights at the hotel. However, for the retail trade businesses, I imagine that most of the sales are occurred by the local populations, right? And we didn't see a significant change in who are the type of customers visiting the stores due to whether you're having an EV charging station or not, right? Okay, so now let's let's focus on a different aspects of the results, right? So I just told you having an EV charging station overall increase the monthly sales of the store, and also that this kind of effect is driven by different channels, and that also is different for different types of business. So here, I'm going to just focus on the two largest sectors in our treatment group, which is the retail trade businesses and the accommodation and food businesses. And we are splitting our sample according to where are the stores located. So you will have some of the stores located, what I call here as disadvantaged communities, right? And according to different categories, according to different characteristics of the population. And all the other stores that are didn't located in these communities are the opposite side, right? So are the rest of the group. So if you focus on income, so income high versus income low, labeled as the first top rows of the diagram, right? For retail trade, We define income high as the census tracts that has a higher average, that has a higher median household income than the state average. So we are separating the census tracts and also together with the stores that are located in the census tracts, right? So if you focus on the low income communities, so the coral colored points is indicating it's a disadvantaged community in terms of income, right? What we find is it has a significantly higher effect of EV charging stations on the business's sales versus if your store is located in the high income communities, EV charging station actually doesn't have much effect comparing to all the other stores located in the same community, right? And if we switch the gear to the racial disparities, so here I'm showing you the communities with the white and Caucasian populations that are above the 50th percentile of the state, and African American populations above the 50th percentiles of the state, right? So coral colors again indicates these are the disadvantaged communities if they have a lower white population or if they have a higher African American populations. What you are going to see, or what you are seeing here, is a significant effect from EV charging stations comparing with an insignificant effect, right? When the charging station, when the stores are located in the non-disadvantaged communities. So the last two rows are what we are using. We are using the DAC or disadvantaged community indicator from the federal's climate and economic justice screening tools. So this screening tool provides a simple indicator, so 1 or 0, yes or no, for every census tract for the United States. We're only using that for the Ohio sample for this study here. And what we find is if you define the disadvantaged communities according to the screening tool, right, and separate those communities, we find a significant, so again, a significant and positive effect of EV charging stations to those stores' sales comparing to the other stores in the same community. However, you didn't see this significant effect in the non-disadvantaged communities, right? So that's for the retail sale. For the accommodation and food services, it's a little bit different. And I would like to point out the major difference is in the income and the disadvantaged community categories, right? So we can see for the effect from EV charging stations, actually, both of these communities, high income, low income, are also going to benefit. Maybe high income benefits slightly more, but low income community also benefits from having charging stations nearby their businesses, right? And you are also seeing that similar results if I'm picking up the DAC indicators from the Federal Environmental Justice Screening Tool. What is also interesting to show here is the racial disparities. So focusing on the middle part of the diagram here, when we have a low share of white populations or a high share of African American population communities, the effect of EV charging stations in terms of boosting up the business sales is so much larger than that in the other type of communities, right? So meaning that if you specifically target these communities, you're probably going to see a higher impact of your policy if your policy's goal is to increase the number of charging stations, right? So that's what we find. Why do we care all these different kinds of results, right? Why do we care whether having an EV charging station can actually affect local businesses? So coming back to our motivations, what we are trying to describe here is an underinvestment problem of EV charging stations, right? If you don't have any interventions of the government, if you don't introduce any policies, probably you are going to have a lower number than of EV charging stations than the most efficient level. So a lot of policies are starting to address this problem, right? So if you look at the federal policies, this is a table from the Department of Transportations. They have a lot of fundings, right, from different programs, like a couple of $1 billion, focus on building more charging infrastructures, including their parking facilities and the utilities of that, right? So in order to make sure all these billions of dollars are spending in a more efficient way, and what is the actual benefits from these policies distributed across the communities, right? I think that's why our study can contribute to inform those kind of decisions. And that's not only from the federal level. At the state level, we're starting to see more and more policies that are focusing on to solve this inequitable investment, right? So like New York State has its own tool of environmental justice screening algorithms. And when they identify different communities at disadvantage versus not disadvantage, they are going to prioritize, right? So one of the policies showing here is they have this charging grant that are going to prioritize locating charging stations in the communities that are labeled as disadvantaged, right? So we do have these policies trying to say we have to implement investment in a more equitable way. And our study actually provides some numbers to say that you are not only solving the justice problems, these different policies could also generate actual benefits that we can quantify in terms of the local business, in terms of its sales, in terms of its food traffic, etc. Right? And lastly, it's not only we care about public policymaking, right? We also have we are also seeing a lot of these charging station companies that are also seeking private solutions. So if you go to EVGo's website, you're going to see that they have a program called the Charging Partnership Program, where they would encourage for business and commercial locations to partner with these charging station installers, right, to have an EV charging station nearby and advertising that to attract more and more customers for visits. So I think our study in general also contributes to that, right? So right now in the marketing campaign, you can actually advertise how many dollars of sales that EV charging stations are going to bring you instead of motivating that in terms of only the numbers of visits. Right? So in the end, I want to acknowledge the collaborators I have on this project, Ziting Huang and Yaqing Liu. And also Clarkson University for providing the funding for this research. Okay, I'm ready for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Qingran. So I am very excited that we're joined by a special guest here to moderate with us today. I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Rim Baltaduonis. So Rim oh, there you are. Welcome, Rim. Thank you for being here. So Rim works as a project scientist with the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratories Gizmo team at Stanford University. He's also an associate professor in the economics department at Gettysburg College and co-directs the Gettysburg Lab for Experimental Economics. And Rim is a longtime affiliate of the Institute for Regulatory Law and Economics, a former visiting senior research scholar at Columbia's Center on Global Energy Policy, and he was a visiting senior scholar at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. His broad areas of research interest are industrial organization, energy and environmental economics, energy security, experimental and behavioral economics, and his current research focuses on the design and behavior of electric power markets. He also conducts workshops on laboratory economics experiments designed to inform energy policy. At Gettysburg, he's taught industrial organization, energy and security, energy economics, and experimental economics. And Rim has also been part of the team that leads our very popular Electricity Grids and Markets boot camp at the Irving Institute. And he earned his PhD and MA in economics from the University of Connecticut and a BSc in economics from Vilnius University in Lithuania. So welcome, Rim. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you lead the discussion after Qingran's wonderful talk. So I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be virtually back on Dartmouth University campus. And thank you for the talk. Thanks everyone for participating in this important discussion conversation. The energy transition is electrifying our economy very rapidly, and electric vehicles is a big part of the solution. So Qingran, thank you very much for sharing your latest research. Let me start with my own larger question. Your study has covered the years during the pandemic, which of course was a major factor affecting the businesses, especially hotels, food, retail sector. People might have behaved quite differently in the early years of your study versus the last maybe few years. So have you thought how that may have affected the data, and have you included that in your deliberations with your co-authors?
Thank you, Rim, for the question. Yes, pandemic plays a big role in the data sets. I think I remember initially when we're getting the data sets, when we're plotting like the sales, you see a huge dump in the monthly sales during the pandemic period. I think approximately, if you look at the data from 2020, that's ranging from, I think, starting in March, and you're going to see a couple of months that has very low sales from all the businesses, right? And we did control that. We didn't exclude the pandemic period because we want the time series to cover the entire years, right? So what we do is we first exclude all the businesses that has missing sales, right? So there are probably a lot of businesses that are closed due to the pandemic, even if they are having EV charging stations before the pandemic. So we have excluded all the businesses in that type. If they are closed, it's not inside our data sample. And we also have the store fixed effect to control whether there are different levels of the sales because you are having different stores. We have the monthly fixed effect to control the different the time trend that are affecting every stores, right? And we also have this combined fixed effect from the census tracts. So where the stores are located in the census tract, which are relatively the small neighborhoods, plus or times across the monthly fixed effects, right? So we have a combination of these fixed effects from the time and also from the small regions of the stores. So that can help us to control whether different locations, right? So if you are in a county that has a different COVID policy than the other counties, which has a different shutting down policies, you're going to have these different trends. So we also have the fixed effects to control that.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have some questions from the audience, and would like to give you an opportunity to respond some of them. Chuck is interested to know whether you have looked at the differences between different types of chargers, so fast DC chargers versus level 2 chargers, and whether that has an effect in the population that you are sampling.
The short answer is we haven't. We do have the ability to look into that. One of the reason that we haven't done that is right now, all the results I'm showing you are just for Ohio, right? We do have the data set from other states. We just haven't combined that into this spending data set. So basically the reason, if we're only looking at Ohio, and we're looking at all the places that are having a new EV charging station installed between these 4 years, we are not really having a lot of places that are being treated here, right? And this is accounting for all the level 2, public level 2 and DC fast charging stations. So in general, a lot of the majority of the charging stations are still level 2, right? You are starting to see a growing trend of DC fast charging stations, but in our data sample, in terms of the numbers, there are not too many yet, right? So what we want to do is we are probably going to combine this data sample with the other states, right? So that we have more treated stores near a DC fast charging station. But I would imagine that if you look at them separately, they are probably going to have a different effect because DC fast charging stations, you don't need to plug in your cars for like 2 hours to get it fully charged, right? You can only live there for 30 minutes, and that's sufficient for like a quick shop in the local stores. And that's probably going to change the customer's decisions a little bit.
In the same vein, do you have data about restricted EV chargers? So for example, if a hotel is placing it and allowing it to be used only by their own customers, and if that would affect then the passing through traffic and the local businesses if there are some restrictions on EV chargers?
So the answer is yes, right? So if you go to this charging station data provided by the Department of Energy, they do have information about who can access these charging stations. So some of the charging stations are labeled as public, indicating basically anyone can access that as long as you are there. Some of them are labeled as private, but there are also some details in the rules. So for example, maybe it's behind a gate, right? Or maybe you have to pay for some customer parkings there, for example. So I think there are a little bit diversities in how do we define as like a public access versus a private access, because a lot of the hotels, even if they have charging stations for their customers, usually there is no gate that are preventing all the other public from accessing it, right?
Mm-hmm. So the policy, I guess, might be quite important when installing these charging stations when it comes to private and public access, now that we see some evidence that it can be affected. Now, in your analysis, how different communities might be affected by the charging stations. There are some observations from participants that in the future the effect might be even bigger, right? As we see more of these chargers installed. But we have Darla interested. So regarding the low effect in high-income communities, could it be because more EV owners live in those areas and charge at home, but then charge when they are away from home, visiting lower income and disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, I think that's very good speculations, right? So for those who are living in higher income communities, they are probably going to choose to charging at home, which they can do overnight charging. And if they have a full battery EV cars, it's actually better to do a full-time, like do overnight charging, then they can use their cars during the day. Right. So I think that's a very valid reason to say that this is probably why we didn't see a lot of effect coming from the higher income communities, especially from the accommodations and the food services, because they're probably going to choose to charge at home. And I personally probably don't think this is a big problem we have to worry about in terms of policy makings, because if people are choosing to charge at home, right, then they are not affecting the underinvestment problem of EV charging stations because they already internalize their benefits at home. Right? So those are the customers we actually don't have to worry about. They would adopt the electric vehicles, they would charge at home, and they would maybe find a charging station. Some of them maybe find charging stations at workplaces. And these are the ones who we are not worrying about getting a lack of access to charging stations. However, those communities, especially disadvantaged or lower income, they are probably the ones who are not even considering buying an EVs, or maybe because EV is too expensive, or maybe they just don't have access to EV charging stations. So I think even if we didn't see a lot of effect coming from higher income communities, that's probably not going to be a big trouble, speaking of policymaking.
And your observations confirms Michelle's anecdotal evidence that she has that people that are in a lower income communities, they don't have access to fast charging at home, so they go to eat out so they could charge quickly in mall areas or strip mall areas. And that's probably why that mechanism of higher effect in lower income communities is being observed. Do you have other channels that you have in mind why that difference is there? The difference between lower income communities and high income communities? You spoke broadly about the channels, what might be contributing, but why specifically the separation in lower income communities and high income communities?
So I think one of the explanations could be, right, when we are looking at these different channels in general, just non-discriminating between different communities, what we see is what is driving the sales is because, or part of the factors driving the sales is because more people are going there, right? And I would imagine a lot of these people are not local, right? So you could have more people coming from these high income communities and going to shopping in the low income communities. So I think that could be one of the factors that are driving why we see the sales increase occurring in the disadvantaged communities. Is maybe part of them is driven by the users living there, but also part of that is driven by the users who are not living there.
Mm-hmm. Chuck has a question about the data for the match stores that you have elsewhere. Do you have similar comparison data that you can analyze?
Right now, I don't think we have. And according to Chuck's question, is he probably? I imagine he probably mentions the like the Norway's data, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So where there is no EV charger has been installed and you have similar type of store, maybe even the same type of chain stores. And
Oh, okay, I see.
so you have no EV charger in your buffer zone and you have EV charger and, you know, looking at exactly same data, sales and traffic and comparing that. Would you be able to do some analysis like that?
I think that actually has been taken care of in this analysis because we the effect, the way we identify the effect is we are looking at before and after periods for the stores that are closer to EVs, right? But we are also looking at the control versus treated group effect or the differences. So the treated group are those that are closer at some point over these 4 years, and outside of the treated group. So we do have a bunch of stores that are not closer. So outside of the buffer we define.
For the sales statistics that you have, how well are you able to match them in time with the placement of EV charger?
Can you repeat the question again?
So the sales statistics that you have and the availability of charger, are they all available at the same time and you matching them at the same moment in time?
So yes, so in terms of time dimensions, right? So the EV charging station data, I think since it's provided by the Department of Energy, that it's actually public access data. So that data is updated, I think maybe at the daily frequency or maybe a weekly frequency. So they keeps updating that data set. But they do keep what do we call this open date variables for each of the charging stations, right? So we are defining the data matching process according to the open date of the charging stations and combined with their location. So that's how we match the two data sets. So the reason why we are using 2019 to 2012, the 4-year time period is majorly because we have the spending data set only covers these 4 years.
Great. So I think we have touched on the questions that we've received from the audience. We are getting close to our end time of this discussion and talk. Qingran, would you have any last comments, maybe policy implications of this study, takeaways that you would highlight as we conclude today's discussion?
Yeah. So I think if I want to summarize that in one sentence, right? I would like just to go back to all these different types of benefits we get from charging stations. So I think there are a lot of studies focusing on the environmental benefits, the health benefits, and also the long-term benefits that are also associated with the environment and health. Those are very important because those are the ones that are received by almost everyone in the society. I think what we also have to shift a little bit focus here or in future studies is we want to focus on maybe some other perspective, things like the local benefits, right? So there are actually some benefits that are distributed locally. For example, sales of business or maybe increasing values of the properties. So if you can have people acknowledge these local benefits and distributed that in different channels or different ways, maybe your policies can be more diversified. So instead of only focusing on paying money to build these stores, right, you can actually target in different areas according to how these benefits are distributed.
Thank you, Qingran. And thank you everyone who joined us today for the conversation and learn about the charging EV situation system that we are developing here in the United States and getting some evidence. I will return the microphone back to Megan and have the Irving Institute close this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rim. Thank you. And thank you, Qingran, so much for a wonderful talk. That was great and a wonderful discussion. We're really happy to have you here. Thank you so much again. So just quickly before we close, we have a couple of upcoming new energy talks. So in next month, we have oops, there we go. Ben Varaga, who is a PhD candidate in electrical engineering at George Washington University. So he specializes in power and energy for smart cities. So we're looking forward to that talk coming up in March. And then in April, we have Dartmouth alum Maddie Crute, who's a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography at Clark University, who will be talking about power lines. So we're very excited for those two talks. So please join us for those. And again, our applications are open for our 24 New Energy Summer Summit. So if you're interested, please check out the Irving Institute webpage or reach out to us with any questions if you're an advanced PhD student, postdoc, or assistant professor working in energy and climate. All right, thank you again so much to Rim, our moderator, and to Qingran so much for the talk. That was really wonderful. And we look forward to hearing updates on your research as you move forward. Thank you again. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.